many channels of information, yet not enough real choice? Well, you're lucky, because you've stopped your remote at the exact right intersection of time and space to bring you the program, The Future. We here at The Future will help you understand all the issues surrounding art and technology. Nigel, first story, please.
I got a piece of Howard Rheingold. He's the editor of the Whole Earth Review, and he's also got a recent book out called The Virtual Community. He talks about computer bulletin boards, electronic communication, and what it all means to us humans.
Okay, now, follow me to the shed, and we'll find out what Trevor's got going. Trevor.
Hi, Stan.
Story, please.
Oh, yeah. I've got an interview with John Perry Barlow. He's, of course, the lyricist with the Grateful Dead rock band, but he's also co-founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They've been working in with the Clinton administration, trying to set the, I suppose, the rules of the road on the so-called information superhighway.
Right,
What is this, Dan? Another one of your artsy-fartsy openings?
thank you very much. And, Nigel's not back there. Linda, did he email you his, story?
Yeah, I have something right here. Faraday's Garden is an interactive installation by New York artist Perry Hoberman. It's a bizarre collection of old machines that come to life if you approach them, and it's designed to make us think about our relationship to technology.
Right. Stand by for the future.
Being a writer, that means I spend a lot of time alone in a room, and that can be rather isolating. I started using a computer so I could do word processing. Someone told me, well, if you're not plugging your computer into your telephone, you might as well be using it as a doorstop. And I thought, well, this might be a good way of gathering information. I quickly discovered that information is useful, but far less interesting than people. I found that I could use my computer and my telephone to contact electronic bulletin board systems and computer networks and virtual communities and meet a lot of people that I would not have had access to otherwise. You used to have a lot of money to buy television time if you wanted to influence people politically, or enough paratroopers to capture the broadcasting station. Now all you have to do is have an electronic bulletin board or an internet account, and you can enter that information in from anywhere, and millions of people anywhere else can have access to it. That's a radical change of the power to influence people's beliefs and perceptions. It used to be a very small number of people had their hands on this power. Now a much larger number of people have their hands on that power. So the net is really a new force in the world. Beyond the technology, it's a force that has to do with being able to influence others. The first democracy in Athens was really centered not only on the Senate, where the political representatives met, but on the agora, the marketplace, where the citizens met every day, not just to buy and sell things, but to talk with each other. It's not just sitting at home and getting your information from television or picking up a newspaper and reading it on the subway. It's by talking with your neighbors and arguing politics, communicating citizen to citizen, that democracies are really built. James Madison, one of the founders of the United States Constitution, said that popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy or both. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to govern themselves must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. This new many-to-many technology gives that power to millions of people now instead of small numbers of people. That's a radical change. It's like an electronic agora. You can go there for information, you can go there for entertainment, but you can also go there to talk with each other without the mediation of a newspaper or a television station or radio station. And that could make the foundation of a radically new kind of democracy. Now, because anybody can plug a computer into a telephone and start a BBS, there's really a very wide variety of them. There are political BBSs of the extreme left and the extreme right, or libertarians or vegetarians. There are BBSs of artists who only want to use it to communicate about art or to make art. There are BBSs that children use, educators use. There are BBSs that people use to organize community action, talk about the potholes in the street and the problems with their local politicians. There's an extreme variety of BBSs. Just the list of the kinds of BBSs goes on for pages and pages and pages. There's an entire network of BBSs for people who believe in unidentified flying objects, flying saucers, visitors from other planets. There are BBSs in which people adopt the identities of characters in television programs. There are BBSs in which people talk about what happened that day on their favorite soap opera. You'll find BBSs in which everything is completely fictional. You'll find BBSs in which everything uses very, very strong language that you wouldn't be able to use on the airwaves. There's really quite a wide variety. The virtual community is virtual only because people use computers and telecommunications to make contact with each other. But those are real people making real contact. I found, after spending an hour or two a day for years communicating with people through the Well, my virtual community, that we began to form friendships and reach out to each other in real life. When a friend of mine found that his son had been diagnosed with leukemia, we developed an online support group. Doctors and nurses and other parents lent not only support, but vital information that he was able to use to understand what was happening, to deal with the doctors. When someone needed an operation, they printed up a poster, advertised it on the Well. People sent in $30 apiece in order to get a poster and to finance that operation. When people had lost their jobs and needed some money in order to not be evicted, people passed a hat, sent real money to help them out in the real world. Increasingly, we're seeing that people who meet through virtual communities can build real communities, whether they're located in a city or whether those people are in many cities and only meet infrequently. When people reach out to help each other, that's a real community, whether it's through a computer that they met or through their church or their job or their real neighborhood. A lot of the interactions in cyberspace in the virtual community have the advantage of removing a lot of the barriers that normally prevent people from communicating with each other. Because we're just using words on a screen, we don't know what the race or age or gender or nationality of all the other people are. Quite often, that enables people to communicate in ways that weren't possible before. The grandmother who wouldn't even make eye contact with the 16-year-old boys hanging out on the corner outside her apartment building might have a very lively debate with those same boys when she gets up into her apartment and logs on to her virtual community. Well, I was very excited when the Tiananmen Square incident happened in China to find out that Chinese students were smuggling out eyewitness accounts of what was going there and putting them on the net so that I could go to my computer screen and hear and read things about those political events that I was not hearing and seeing through the mass media. That was very exciting. At the same time, I have seen people use the masking of the medium to deceive others. There was a fellow on the Well who, it was discovered, had been romancing 8 different women at the same time, telling them all a different story. Because he was able to mask who his real identity was, he was able to get away with things he wouldn't have gotten away with face-to-face. So I think we have a real, genuine opportunity to communicate across barriers, and we have a real, genuine opportunity to fool people, to pretend to be nicer people than we really are. And that deception is the dark downside, the dark side of the virtual community. and that ability to reach across barriers. That's the light side. And I think that they go together. You can't really separate one from the other. You're just going to need to learn how to use this medium. You don't trust everybody who calls you up on the telephone and tells you to send them money. You shouldn't trust everybody you meet on a computer network. I think that the future of the net is really in doubt, that very large forces are now at work. For the last 10 years or so, people have been able to use this accident of technology by combining computers and communications to build communities and have fun and exchange information, do business, do science, education. Now that it's a big business, it threatens to become a commodity. Now that has the advantage of economies of scale, and it has the disadvantage of trivializing it. Is this communication medium going to become something as trivial as a game show or a home shopping network? Is that all that there is to it? Will this be something that the political powers that be will see as dangerous to them and restrict? I think that the decisions that are made in the next couple of years are going to be crucial, and that it's up to citizens to understand this technology and to make the public interest part of the negotiation.
I used to say that what was going on with the digitization of everything was the biggest thing since Gutenberg, and I'm now inclined to think that it's the biggest thing since fire in terms of what it's going to do to what it is to be human. I would say this is probably the most significant thing that's ever happened in the history of the human race. When I was in college, I read a guy named Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French theologian in the earlier part of this century, and he talked about something called the noosphere, the sphere of mind. And that seemed like a pretty persuasive idea to me, and I didn't give the matter much more thought until I encountered the internet, and suddenly I saw that what was going on there was the actual wiring of the noosphere. That we were creating the collective organism of consciousness. I don't know what that thing will think. I suspect that it's been up and thinking things for a long time, of which we were no more aware than the cells in our bodies are aware of the thoughts in our forebrains. But I think that what's going to happen is that we will become a more direct participant in those global thoughts, each one of us individually. I think what it is to have a self, to be an individual, will eventually change a lot. I had some sense of living in a place that was so recently settled that things were still getting worked out in terms of the social contract, and I could see that there were a lot of similarities in this new environment. There were a lot of things that were anything but nailed down, and there were a lot of elements of the social contract that were being written all the time. And there was also an element that it just was going to be very hard to impose any kind of law on, because it changes so much faster than law does. So it would always be kind of a frontier environment. I think about the bleakest imaginable future would be where the cable companies and the telephone companies and various large institutions were in competition to see who could spit the most stuff at you. I mean, 500 channels and nothing on is not a place I want to live. It's much more interesting when you can talk back, when you can create your own media and put them back up the wire. My ideal cyberspace scenario would be one where it didn't exist at all, you know, where we were still all in the physical world and made our living with things we could touch and never were out of physical contact with one another, and were not virtualized. But that doesn't seem to be the way things are going. And given that, I want to see an environment where it's as possible, where it's possible to have experiences. There's a big difference between information and experience. And I think that it's conceivable that you can create a thick enough cyberspace so that you actually have the experience of the other people in it. This bears the same relationship to real community that refined white sugar does to real food. I mean, this is very thin stuff. It's no Amish barn raising in there. And unfortunately, it's the only community that a lot of its inhabitants ever experience. They're not very good at it, by and large. There's an awful lot of flaming and general ranting, and the signal-to-noise ratio is lousy. And it is still the case that what we're talking about is information and not experience. And I think that there is a big difference between those two things that most people have lost track of. I think that the people who can get by without it probably ought to. But part of the problem is that the rest of the culture is undergoing a change where everybody is in motion all the time. And it's almost impossible to earn a living in the modern world unless you are in constant movement, which means that you have to have something that stays put just in order for people to get a hold of you. I mean, it's now to the point where I have a whole new community of friends and colleagues and associates who can actually write barlow@EFF.org, because getting me on the phone no longer works. It's not possible to find me on the phone. And I increasingly don't return phone messages because they just stack up and I can't deal with them. I mean, a lot of people are in that condition. The problem is there just isn't much economic room in the physical world. I mean, I was a cattle rancher for 17 years, and I'd still be one if I could be. But in the United States, 40% of the population was in agriculture at the turn of the century, and now less than 1% is, and they're not doing very well. We simply became too productive for our own good. And that's true regardless of what kind of physical product you're making. If you're making something that you can touch, you're in economic trouble. Somebody said in the 19th century rather smugly that the poor will always be with us, and I think the poor will always be with us. What concerns me is that we're moving from an era where we have haves and have-nots into an era where we have no's and no-nots. And what EFF is trying to do is to make this stuff as ubiquitous and affordable on the connection end as we can by promoting telecommunications regulations that would give access to high-speed data service to anybody who's got a phone line. One of the things we're going to have to do is to do a better job of defining ownership of information. I mean, traditionally, information was the collective resource of humankind. And what you could own were the various bottles in which information got put. I mean, it was felt by most everyone that if you went to a library, the intellectual resources in that library belonged to everybody. But that it was okay to charge for a book. Well, the books are going away. The bottles are leaving it. And we're down to the information itself, and people are now trying to assert ownership of that. And, you know, I think there's going to be a struggle here. There is already a struggle. On the other hand, I want to get paid for the work that I do with my mind. And I think we're going to have to come up with some new ways of doing that, which will be more like performance, I suspect. I think it's going to change what government is. I don't think that government as we know it today will survive the widespread extension of the net. I think that democracy is going to be less the issue than something that is much more organic than that. I mean, right now, you have government which is imposed and is created by the will of the majority. What I see growing inside cyberspace is something which emerges, rather like the Code of the West or those sorts of unwritten laws, which is more like consensus than democracy. Culture is a funny thing. I think there's some kind of general conservation of culture law in the world. I mean, old cultures get homogenized out of existence and new ones are constantly forming all the time. I mean, I see, I hang out with kids on the Lower East Side in New York who are all refugees from the suburbs, who were raised on the Brady Bunch, and whose cultural icons were people like Walter Cronkite. They don't have anything to do with television now. They're leading kind of a frontier existence down there, hacking out their way in abandoned buildings and squats, and you know, they've got a culture. They've got their own language. They've got their own jokes, and it's a rich little culture. So those things are happening all the time, I think. You know, people get attached to culture as though culture were a stable thing. And it's only really good stuff when it's constantly alive and moving and changing. I mean, cultural preservation, I'm afraid, is kind of wrong-headed. And I say that as a member of a dying culture, too. I mean, I hate to see the sort of the cowboy culture of Wyoming lose its accent and put on Adidas and, you know, become homogenized into television land, but other things emerge.
The piece is named Faraday's Garden because I use a lot of motors and electrical appliances, and Michael Faraday was a scientist a few hundred years ago who actually invented the electric motor. So this piece is a kind of homage to him. The piece uses switch matting, which is the floor covering that is used generally in security systems for burglar alarms. And it's in their contact switches, 2 bands of copper. When you step on them, it triggers the switch. And the switch matting is divided up into different pads, 64 different pads, which go into a computer. And then the computer decides what to turn on or off based on a number of different factors. And decides how long to turn things on or off. What it's turning on or off are countless appliances from every era, from basically the entire 20th century, from the Great Depression up until the ultra-contemporary. So as you walk around the room, you have a kind of bubble of activity, of noise and light and sound as you move around. Things around you come on, and the more people there are in the room, the shorter the time is that things come on, so that when there are lots of people, the piece kind of just twitches a lot. We're not interacting with the machines. They're kind of interacting with us. We sort of make ourselves out to be sort of a part of the machine. In solutions to interactivity where basically you have to follow a limited set of choices, I mean, in fact, that's not really interaction. It just sort of makes you more like a machine. The point in interactive art and the direction that I think things should go is that you have to make things that give people, don't give people a limited set of choices. They don't hem people in to the point where they really can't choose to do anything they damn well please. The interesting thing about what I'm doing here is that in some ways it's extremely simple, and there isn't, it's very easy to get, I mean, people understand it immediately when they come in. Kids especially, when they play with this piece, what happens is they start to play with it, and I think very quickly it becomes what they think the world should be like for very young children. I've had children play with the piece for a while, and when they leave the piece, they just stomp around on the ground and try and get things to happen. We want to get an instantaneous response, and we want to be able to make the world kind of in our own image, and since we're very responsive, kind of malleable creatures, we want the world to be the same way. So I think a lot of what's happening with virtual reality and interactive computing and so on is about making the world sort of in our own image. We're all interested in just kind of the latest thing. We just want to sort of see what everyone's come up with over the last year, and we don't really want to be reminded of all the stuff that's kind of already happened. And I've always been very interested in the things that are obsolete. I don't think the problems that technology addresses go away. I think the technology kind of changes and we come up with new solutions. This piece is about issues of technology that are in the air now, and it's about how...
Welcome to yet another edition of that television program called The Future. Right now, let's try and find those pesky story producers to see what the show is going to be about today. The Shed. Okay, guys, what's happening today? Are we finished?